ordered good weather. We all got that. Before we get started, I want to thank both the League and the library for doing these educational series. I think there is no better way of serving all of us as citizens of the community to have good knowledge about what we vote on. And clearly, Geauga is unique, to be perfectly honest with you, compared to other counties in the state. Before we get started, let's talk about a few definitions so we all are talking the same language. And I'm going to apologize in advance because auditors, like every other entity, we have auditors speak, right? We speak our own language, and sometimes we do a disservice to people because we don't always articulate what we mean by a certain language. So let's first talk about some things you may notice on your tax bill. Appraised value. What is appraised value? That's what we believe the approximate value of your home is that you would sell on the open market. So if your house is worth $100,000 and you're going to sell it to a party for $100,000, we consider that your appraised value. You'll also notice on your tax bill a word called assessed value. And what does that mean? You simply take your appraised value and you multiply that by 35%. Now, the natural question is, why do we do that? I have no clue. The Ohio Constitution embeds that in the statute. That is the percentage they've chosen way back before my time. And we've always argued as auditor, where did we get that number? And no one seems to have the answer. The next question we hear all the time is, what is 1 mil? What is 1 mil of tax? What does that mean? 1 mil is a pretty simple definition. It's 1/1,000 times your assessed value. So let's take the example of a $100,000 house. That's the appraised value. The assessed value would be $35,000, and then 1/1,000 would be $35. So every time the house moves by $100,000, another $35 of tax gets added. What's included in your tax bill? We tax you on your land, we tax on your dwelling, and then other improvements. If you have an outbuilding, if you have an outstructure, if you have a corral or other fixtures or furnishings, we tax on those various items. Then you've heard the word inside millage. And of course, that's the mystery word. What is inside millage? Inside millage is unvoted tax. It's a tax you didn't elect to pay. Our legislatures chose to embed in the Ohio Constitution a provision that allows for every government to levy a tax up to 10 mils of value. And they do that without your consent. So let's talk a little bit about what happens in Geauga with that 10 mils of inside millage. So let's do the math. 10 mils times $35 for 100,000 of value would be obviously equal to $350. That's the total of a $100,000 house. You can do the straight math. A $300,000 house, multiply 350 by 3. In Geauga, 45% of your inside millage, or 4.5 mils, goes to the school districts. 3 mils, or 30% of the inside millage, goes to whatever municipality you live in. If you live in a township, it goes to the township. If you live in a village, it goes to the village. If you live in the city of Chardon, it goes to them. And then 25%, or 2.5 mils, goes to the county. The idea behind the legislator giving us that privilege of taxing you without your consent is to basically fund the basic formation of government. And there's a lot of consternation with that, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. Here's the problem with inside millage. It moves proportionally to your value. If your value goes up by a factor of 2, inside millage goes up by a factor of 2. It's a one-for-one exchange. So that's something we need to be aware of, and we didn't vote for that to change. And that's something we all should be concerned with. However, recent legislation, specifically House Bill 335, has limited the ability for that inside millage to climb, and it's capped it to an annual inflationary number. It can't exceed, on a per-year basis, more than what the government determines to be inflation. But that's going forward. That's not looking backward. Let's now talk about outside millage. I think we all know what that is. When you go to the ballot box to vote, you vote on various levy items. All of those things you vote on are outside millage. Those will not take effect unless the majority of the voters vote affirmatively for that particular issue. Those do not move with value. That's a misconception. Those are static. However, they do shift with something called tax equalization. Tax equalization is because when properties change value, they don't all change identically. One may go up and one may go down. What happens when that occurs is the tax moves from one property to the other property because the value shifted. That's why they call it equalization. So you could have no tax increase, but through the process of reval, your tax could go up or could go down based on the shifting that goes on all the time. But again, the outside millage does not change with valuation. Let's talk about something else, and that's called the 20 mil floor for schools. You've probably heard of it. Everybody goes, oh, we've never heard of it before. It seems this last reappraisal, because all of a sudden it became the hot spot. In the Constitution, actually in 1976, House Bill 920 embedded in that law the ability or the requirement that every school district in Ohio essentially was guaranteed 20 mils of local funding. On its surface, that sounds very reasonable. Here's the problem. Here's the devil in the details. The definition of what they count as being locally funded was rather, was carved out to only include certain types of levies. So for example, if a school had an emergency levy, a substitute levy, an incremental levy, a permanent improvement levy, a bond issue, or income tax, none of those are counted in the local contribution. Personally, I think that's unfair, but that's how the law was written. The good news to this is House Bill 186 has now required that those levies be, the substitute, the emergency, and the incremental be included in that calculation. So it lifted roughly half of the school districts that were at the floor off of the floor. So these dynamics are occurring every time there's a reappraisal, and all of these factors kick in. So let's talk for just a second on how Geauga is affected, because I think everybody talks about the state numbers, and there's $24 billion of property tax. I mean, to me, that's a staggering number. But let's just talk about Geauga. And this is the year just following our reappraisal. So it's the tax year of payment, 2024. In 2024, Geauga taxed all of our residents, inside, outside, and floor adjustment, $250 million, $248 million. I don't know about you, but that shocked me. I knew we were highly taxed. I didn't realize how high. The interesting component of that is almost 10% of that money was provided to us from the state. And that comes in the form of what's known as rollback. Any levy that was put on the ballot and passed before 2013 was provided a provision that the state would help the taxpayer fully fund whatever district brought that money to the table. So your contribution to a particular tax bill pre-2013 was only 87.5%. After 2013, you pay 100%. So that provision in just 2024 from those old levies was generating almost $24 million of state money coming to us. That's, I think, important to note. It's almost 10%. Additionally, $45.5 million of it was inside millage. So weigh that. $250 million, $45.5 million of it is inside unvoted. And another $6 million was floor adjustment. That only happened in 2 school districts. West Geauga and Berkshire were the only 2 that were at the floor. If you're in the Kenston area, you did not get the floor adjustment. So let's talk about what happened in 2023. Our values went up on average 30%, which meant inside millage skyrocketed 30%. That's how the math works. The floor adjustment then added another $6 million of unvoted tax. So you got a millage adjustment of unvoted money from the inside millage component, and you got an unvoted component called floor adjustment if you live in the 2 school districts that have the floor adjustment component. The good news is this: almost 90% of the inside millage increase was absorbed and given back to you by the county, townships and municipalities. So what happened was we went to these particular entities and said, this is getting out of control. They voluntarily said, we will give back a percentage of it. And they gave, 90% of them gave back their money. We had one school district that surrendered $1 million of their inside millage adjustment. So that's good news. The better news is there's been certain actions taken that will mitigate that occurrence recurring again. And that is through this inside millage being capped at inflation, which is a new law. The 20-mil floor now includes emergencies and substitutes and incremental levies. And the last component is the 20-mil floor is now also capped at inflation on an annual basis. So we may think that's all a great solution going forward, and it is better than it was, but here's the reality. All of the solutions that we put in place are temporary, right? They go away once the mitigation's over. And for most people, they've stopped mitigating. So you're seeing the effects of that increase from 30%. So therein lies the problem. And now you enter an initiative known as the Abolish Property Tax movement. And I think in order to kick off the conversation with the electeds, I've asked Jim Blaze to come up and speak a little bit about what is the amendment that's being proposed. It's very simple to understand, and maybe walk us through some of the components that we have to be concerned about with the legal aspects. Jim, would you mind?